All right, welcome everyone. I'm Jen Kramer, and I'm going to be talking about CSS4 grid systems. So my background, I've been in website design development for 16 years. I am a Joomla person. Sorry. I know, I didn't put it on my submission form. I wrote 2 books on Joomla, and I've done like over a dozen Joomla training videos for lynda.com. But I do teach a little Drupal and a little WordPress now at Harvard University Extension School. And it's like the front row over there is like, I've got 2 former students and a fellow faculty member over there. So anyway, so I teach part-time at Harvard University Extension School, and I freelance also. So I am very excited about the CSS4 grid systems. This is a new specification. It's actually going to be baked into CSS, the whole concept of grid. So we just heard the talk right before this one was all about existing grid systems, and there was a lot of whining and complaining about how horrible things are. And we love CSS. I mean, there's so many awesome things about CSS, but getting things to align on a page often eludes people. All right? And CSS has other problems as well. It can kill you, right? And we know that most of the time breakdown in modern web design is sort of spent in this following way. The thing that takes up the second most amount of our time happens to be getting the layout to work in CSS before we give up and go back to using table-based layouts. Go tables! Which is only second to, of course, trying to get the bastard to work in Internet Explorer, right? So anyway, we've been dealing with these layout issues for a long time, and your problems originate in one place. You have used hacks. You didn't know you've been hacking all these years, but you have been hacking for years. So let's talk about how you have been hacking. So first of all, we're going to be talking about responsive design, of course, and responsive design has a very specific definition that we often lose sight of. We tend to think of things as responsive design because it has media queries. Responsive design does not mean it just has media queries. It has 3 characteristics as defined by Ethan Marcotte in his article From a List Apart. And so these 3 characteristics are the flexible grid-based layout, media queries, and images that resize. There's a couple of other talks here at this conference about images that resize. So I'm really going to be focusing on the grid-based layout and the media queries. So you can have a grid-based layout without media queries. It's just a single dimension grid system. It will be what it is. It can be flexible in that it can resize, but if it's got 3 columns at this big, it still has 3 columns at this big. Make sense? Okay. So I'm going to be working on those grids and media queries. And of course, we'll be doing a lot of this too. We are the only crazy people out there that do this, right? All right, so floats. Let's start with floats, the wonderful world of floats. We love floats, right? No? Okay, remember, floats are hacks. They were hacks right from the start. Floats were designed to put things into documents like images, make that image over here and wrap the text so nicely around it, and won't that be lovely? We've hacked them for years. Right after table-based layout, we hacked with floats. And so the way that we make these hacks work, we have rows and we have cells. So I'm going to show you some code here momentarily that'll make this a little bit more clear. But typically we have some kind of row type of tag. It's often a div. Inside of that, we have a series of additional tags that may be semantic HTML5 tags, or maybe more divs, good times, that are going to determine how many columns we have across, right? This is like every grid system ever described. Rows are designed to clear the floats. If you float the individual cells, the rows do the clearing. You clear the parent of the thing that you floated. What I have just told you is golden. You should write it down if you've never heard it before. Clear the parent of the thing that you float. You will solve 90% of your layout issues if you remember to do this. If I sound bitter, it's because it's too much web design teaching over too many years, people who don't do this. The source ordering in the HTML is going to kind of determine the display. There is things like push and pull, which can rearrange things on the page for you, but it's in a very minor extent that you can do rearrangement. And one of the things that was really a major disadvantage of floats is equal columns. It's like the kryptonite of floats. So if we take a look at that, Let's take a look at some code. So, if you are following along at home, I have up here at GitHub, this is github.com/gen4web, number 4 web, /CSS4 grid. I have a bunch of files here. These are the ones I'm going to be showing you today. And so here in my fine copy of Sublime Text, we'll go ahead and open up start. Float.css. And so let me just go ahead and show you what this looks like in a browser. And let me put it in the right browser, which is this browser. Okay, so here we've got an awesome web page here. All right, very simple layout. So I've got a header, I've got a footer, I've got a left column, I've got some other stuff going on in the middle of the page. I can start to shrink the page down and stuff moves around, right? Because of course we've coded this properly with floats and relative sizing. We hit some breakpoint somewhere along the way, the page rearranges, and we wind up with boxes down towards the bottom. That left column goes towards the bottom, and we can continue to shrink the page down. And then we get things stacked on top of each other, right? So you do this every single day. Yeah? Awesome. So what we've got, what we've got for code going on there is this. I've got some divs that are going on here. So you'll see that we have divs with a class of row. We have some more semantic things happening inside, including sections. We have articles. We have some asides that are going on. I have a nested row in here as well. So you can dig through all of that HTML, and if you take a look, I have 2 style sheets that are available to you, just so you know. One's called Basic. Basic is the basic styling, like colors and fonts and all the rest of it, basically anything but layout. One thing I do want to point out to you is at the very top of the page, the first like 8 lines of what's going on up there, this is the border box model. How many people are unfamiliar with the border box model in CSS? You can admit it. Okay, not really totally clear. All right, so if you have a box on a page, and let's say that that box has some level of margin, some level of border, some level of padding, as well as a width, how do you determine the overall width of that box? What do you add together? You have to add all the things. You add margin, plus border, plus padding, plus the width declaration, right? That width declaration doesn't include padding, border, or margin. True? Right. So the border box is a very interesting new feature that we have. So there in line 3 for the HTML tag, we declare that we're going to use border box sizing. And then in line 6, what does that say? All things and everything that comes before and after that universe, we're going to inherit that box sizing. All right, so every tag on this web page is going to be border box. And what we do now is, when we actually put in width colon whatever number, that will include the padding and the border and the width of the content. Yeah? But not the margin. How cool is that? So it makes things really easy as you do your math in your grid systems. Oh, that's kind of brilliant. So, so that is something that you should think about doing as you roll your own grid systems. So that's pretty much all I want to say about that. Everything else in here is code, you know, you've done all that stuff before. All right, so then if you take a look at my float style sheet, I've got up here on the top, we've got our little hacky thing that does our clear before and after our rows. We have, it's mobile first, so it's got its own width and margin associated with it. That's everything stacked on top of each other. Then we have a series of media queries where we're going to be changing our widths along the way. We're inheriting in the properties from outside the media query. And then down here on larger devices, it gets a little bit more interesting, where we've got different widths and so forth. And then down at the very bottom, we have our push and pull. So that's the magic sauce that makes push and pull work. What you do is you set up your elements to have a relative position on the page. Relative position means that you can move things around, but the space from where you move that object is maintained. This is the difference between absolute and relative positioning. Absolute means you take that thing, you move it. and the space that was there is closed behind it. Relative positioning means that space that you had there is left behind. So now you can move something else into it. So using the property of left here, we're just going to move these things back and forth on the page. So that's how push and pull works. I didn't invent any of this. I'm just telling you. All right? So far, so good? You look bored, so this is awesome. Okay, great. So let's move on then. So now we know how that works. We'll move on to Flexbox. So Flexbox is not a grid system. Let me be very clear on that. Flexbox is not a grid system. What is it? It is a way of taking individual UI elements and laying them out on a page, maybe in a row, maybe there's a series of rows that are associated with them. You have something coming from the database. You have some unknown number of somethings coming from the database. You need to lay them out on a page. You know, you're Pinterest and you need to lay out 5 bazillion pictures on a page, or whatever it happens to be. So Flexbox is a great way of doing this. It's also one of the only ways that we have of doing vertical centering in equal heights, and it's going to expand to fill the space. So that issue of before where we had some columns that are sometimes short with our floats, right? We can actually have columns that are equal heights, and we don't have to solve that problem with JavaScript. Woohoo! Isn't that great? All right? But, and it's kind of magic, actually. I like this one, too. It's kind of magic. We just sort of tell the computer, like, what we want it to do, and, like, this magical layout happens, and it's totally awesome, because it fixes a lot of the things that happens with floats. But one of the big drawbacks is that the layout's driven by the content and how that content loads. So you don't know how many boxes you're going to get to lay out in Flexbox. Flexbox is going to decide how it's going to lay things out for you. You have a little bit of control as to where those boxes are going to wind up being, but not absolute control, not if you let Flexbox do its thing, okay? So if you are one of those control freaks, Flexbox may not be that awesome for you because it's going to do what it's going to do. Part of the problem with Flexbox is that it has this sordid history of being rewritten several times. The previous speaker talked about it still being a draft specification. It's probably really pretty finalized at this point. We started off with one set of syntax in 2009. We decided to rewrite the whole thing in 2011, the so-called tweener syntax. And then and the current syntax is probably where it's going to be. You may need to have prefixing depending on your browser support that's required, and this is what the current support looks like. So as usual, anything less than IE9, including IE9, is not supported. How many of you are still having to support IE6? Oh, thank goodness. How many IE7s? Yeah, right. Federal government, right? Awesome. Yeah. IE8s? Few of you? Yeah. So this is where it starts to get a little bit difficult, but at least we have polyfills. Yeah, and then after that. So believe it or not, IE10 is the one that supports the tweener syntax. It's the only one. At the time, it was very cutting edge for Flexbox, but you know, no longer. IE11 and Edge has got some buggy implementations to it, I am told, but it has full support, and everything else has full support. So it has its set of issues, but it is what it is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my HTML code, and I'm going to change this to the Flexbox style sheet. Exactly the same HTML, and all I'm going to change is the layout CSS, and it actually looks very much the same as it did before, and it actually will function very much the same as it did before. Okay, so scrooge it down, we got this thing, we got that thing, you know, the boxes stack on top of each other. So only we in this room could get excited about exactly the same thing coded differently. It's totally awesome. All right, so let me show you that magic. So with Flexbox, it's a little bit, it's a very, very different approach to the code. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our rows. Our rows are the parents of the individual boxes that are inside of it. Those individual parents get to have the display of Flex. Okay, so that's the display of Flex. And we set some parameters associated with that, like it's going to lay out in a row, and the boxes will wrap onto the next line. You can lay Flexbox out in columns if you wish. The interesting part gets down here. Instead of using widths, we're going to use this flex property. There's a flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. Those are the three numbers that are there. And flex grow is how fast that box grows. You can have some boxes grow faster than others as the screen gets larger. Likewise with shrink, some boxes can shrink down faster than other boxes as the screen gets smaller. And then 98% is what they call the basis. It's effectively going to wind up being the width here in this particular context. So then here in my devices, I can go ahead and lay out my different sizes. And then in my large devices down here, here's where it gets really cool, because down at the bottom where we rearrange the columns, no more of that push-pull stuff. Okay? We just simply use the order property in Flexbox, and we say, take that one column that we had before, the right column, and we're going to make it come second, and the one that was effectively the left column, we're going to make it come first, and we wind up with a page that looks this way. If I wanted to switch those around, I don't know why that keeps coming up. All I have to do is just, if I said the order was 1 and 2, what am I going to get? Anybody? Switch size just by switching those two numbers, and sure enough, that's what we get. The margins aren't so pretty. I have to switch those around a little bit now to make the layout a little bit prettier, but the order is very, very easy to switch. Make sense? Awesome. Okay, so to do this, what we had to do was a little bit of hackery here. This is not really the way that Flexbox is intended to work. We are imposing on Flexbox how we want it to behave at these different media queries in order to make this into a grid system. Okay, so it's a little bit of hackery going on here in order to make Flexbox layout web pages. However, we are starting to see this out in the field. Anybody work with Bootstrap 4? There's a SAS variable you can toggle in Bootstrap 4 that will turn on the Flexbox-based grid system. Anybody working with Foundation 6? It's already in production. SAS-based variable, you toggle it, and the entire grid system is laid out in, with Flexbox. So that's kind of cool. So it's already out there, it's in the field, people are already doing this. All right, so let's come to the part you've all been waiting for, which is the CSS4 grid systems. All right, finally. So why CSS4 grid? Bunch of things. First of all, it is actually built into this specification. It is, of course, in development, so it is not in a finalized state at this point. By no stretch of the imagination is it finalized at this point. The browser support is not good, shall we just say. There is no row markup required, so no more of this row cell kind of thing going on. You're just going to program exactly where you want things to appear on the page. That's really cool, which means we can make really, truly more semantic-based layouts, and we can cut back on the amount of HTML that we have. You'll also see in our CSS that we cut that way back as well. Really nice. We lose like 30 lines of CSS. Grid is designed to work in 2 dimensions. Okay, Flexbox, really it's 1, if you think about it that way. It's an infinite row of boxes. Our screens are not infinite, so they wrap, right? But grid is actually designed to say, put it here, put it there. Makes sense? So there's an X and Y component to grid that is not there in Flexbox. So the general recommendation is to use Flexbox for the UI elements, but use grid for the major layout on the web page. And I'm going to show you how that works. Okay, so issues, there's just a few. So first of all, there's almost no browser support. Yay! Okay, you can take a look at this particular link here, and this will tell you how you need to configure your browser in order to get this to work. So you want to enable CSS grid layout. These are the flags that you need to set in the various browsers in order to actually see it. So if you're following along at home, kids, make sure you set your browser up correctly first. You've got to turn on these flags in order for it to work. Needless to say, your clients are unlikely to have that, so this is not really suitable for production. Okay, the spec isn't fully implemented in some browsers, and or there are bugs. We will encounter those bugs today. Even better. Okay? All right, so those are my current recommendations. So let's code. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is, I have here my starting grid document, and I have all of this extra syntax in here, which I can get rid of. So I can get rid of, every time I have an instance of a div class row, I can get rid of it. Yay! Who's getting happy already? Okay, so bye-bye. I'm going to leave this one in, this nested row here, and I'll show you why in a little while. I'm going to leave that one alone. But these other rows, they must die. Bye-bye. Okay. And I think I also got rid of a bunch of classes as well, because I can be tricky with my CSS selectors. So we don't have to call things call4 anymore. We don't have to call things call push1. So if you know CSS and you can write a reasonable selector, more power to you. You can get rid of all those classes. How cool is that? Which makes things really easy to transfer from one template or theme to another, yeah? One system to another, Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, good times. Okay, so the cleaner the code, the happier we all are. All right, so there we go. I've just cleaned this up super well. This is like a cooking show, you know, where I like Julia Child and I put the raw turkey in the oven and I say, and 3 hours go by, and then you pull out the fully baked turkey. It's awesome. I love Julia Child. Okay, so I'm going to refer to my notes here to make sure I get this right. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do here is make sure I have all my correct documents open. There we go. So I'm going to make the following declaration. So there is a div with a class of wrapper, which hopefully I left there on my, yes, I did. That one. This one. So I left this div with a class of wrapper around the whole thing. This is the parent of the major elements that I want to lay out. In other words, my header, this section here, and this aside, that's the other column, and the footer at the bottom. Super simple layout. The parent of all of those is the div with a class of wrapper. So for the parent of the grid elements, you're going to set it up in the following way. The display will be of grid and a grid gap. Oh my gosh, I just did 10 pixels. Who wants to string me up? Yeah, I did not do like 1%, right? Because like that's what you would think you should do. Well, there's a bug in Chrome where 1% doesn't work, but 10 pixels does. So yes, I do know better, but I'm working with the bugs that I have, okay? So 10 pixels is our grid gap, and I've also put a margin on this of 1%. Okay, then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lay out my large version of this page first. And to do that, in my big media query down here at the bottom, what I've done is the following. And this is all that we need. So I'm specifying grid columns and grid rows here. Okay? So, and the numbers refer to, if we think about the layout, there's actually, this is a 4-column layout is the way I've envisioned it. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, but the space in between them is what we count. So the first column goes from 1 to 2. The second column goes from 2 to 3. The third column goes 3 to 4. The fourth column goes 4 to 5. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the way it is. It's not column number 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be so much easier. We specify how many columns we want something to contain, because it may be more than one column that we want to span. True? Sometimes we want to have things go big. All right, so our header is going to go from 1 to 5. That makes sense? It's going to encompass 4 columns. And because it happens to be the first thing that's here in my source order, okay, the very first thing in the source order, the browser is smart enough to put that at the top of the page. I could specify a grid row position for that if I wanted, but because of my source order, it's smart enough to put that at the top of the page. All right, then the next thing I'm going to do is here for my section and the section and the aside, the one that's forming the little skinny column. So the grid column part of that, for the section, I'm going to have it go from column 2 to 5. So that's I have to start thinking the opposite way. Column 2 to 5, which is the right side of the page, and the body aside here, that's column 1 and 2, the very first part of that page. However, if I leave off this grid row, let's just take that guy out. I'll show you what happens. Oops. And we refresh our page. We wind up with this. Okay, so our header's in the right place. The second thing in the source code is the section, which is this thing over here. And then the third thing is this, the aside, right? So it's what the browser has done is it said, I'm just going to, I know you have a grid system here, but you haven't told me what row to put things in. So each of these elements, I'm just going to put it each in the next row. See that? Okay, so that's what's going on here. So the header's in the first row, the section's in the second row, the column over here, the aside is in the third row, footer's at the bottom. So what we need to do then is we need to add the second little bit of information here about the grid row. So I'm telling it what row I would like this information to appear, which is row 2, between rows 2 and 3. So the header goes from 1 to 2, and then these items will go from 2 to 3. By adding that, then these things will show up side by side. Yay. So easy. Yes?
So that's awesome. That means that if you don't declare it, it's implicit.
Yes. Yes. Isn't that wonderful? It just knows how grid systems are supposed to work, which is really cool. Okay? Yeah, I know. Like, how many people are ready for this, tomorrow? Yeah, it's really awesome. Sorry. Especially the poor lady who has to still work on IE7. I'm so sorry. It's just awful. So anyway, so this is sort of like the hot part of the talk right here. So this is how you do it. There's a couple of other syntaxes that can be used for grids, the CSS4 grid layouts. You can have named regions. So yeah, I can name something the header, name something like main content, name something left column, whatever it is in my layout, and then I can call those positions in my grid system. Personally, I think this way makes sense, but I'm a developer and I think like a developer. So if you think differently, there's a couple of other ways you can do the same type of layout, but you're going to do it with slightly different syntax. And the Grid by Example website is a great place to go to take a look at all of that, and I'll bring that up for you. So Grid by Example. Rachel Andrew is a developer based out of the UK. She's been doing a ton of work with the grid layout, and she was actually just asked to join the W3C based on her work here. So you can take a look at this website. It'll walk you through a number of simple examples of how grid works. Okay, simple examples. We can rearrange things all kinds of crazy ways on the page. And she gives you the code, including the HTML and the CSS. So you can go through all of those examples if you want. All right, so back to my example. So now that I've got things basically laid out on the page in terms of their general positions, the next thing I have to deal with is these orange boxes here. So does anyone have any suggestions? What should I do with those orange boxes? We know how we want them to look. How might I go about marking all of those up?
Could use Flexbox.
Flexbox. Flexbox, yes. You don't actually need to use the grid system. You can use Flexbox for just those particular items. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to set up these things here. So I've got, and actually more of the code here winds up being Flexbox than the grid system. This is pretty much the grid system. In fact, I should just show you what it looks like here at the different resolutions at this point in time. So as I shrink this down, see, just using the source order, it's just going to reorder here on the page. Very cool, right? Based on what I've already gone ahead and written. Okay, so to get that last row to work, we'll go ahead and put that. So this is some stuff about Flexbox. So the row, of course, is going to be flex. I'm also putting in some padding here to make it look pretty. That's at our small dimensions. And then for our larger dimensions, I have a couple of other declarations based on how I want it to behave at this media query and also at this media query. So this is just me dropping in the Flexbox bits. There they are. And so now when I refresh my page, there's my boxes. They're so flexible. And when I go ahead and start to squash the page down here, things will behave as we believe they should. So there they are. And squash them down some more, and we get our mobile layout. Pretty awesome, huh? Yeah. So how long do we have to wait? Too long. Too long, my friends, too long. Okay, so let me give you my last little bits here about my recommendations for this point in time. So if you are concerned about browser support, and who isn't, you can't go wrong with floats. Just remember, clear. If you float, you must clear. Tattoo that on your forehead. Remember that you clear the parent element. If you do all of that, floats will be so much easier than what you've been doing before. And then if you're okay with a few prefixes and learning something new that's like really radically different than what you're accustomed to in layout, Flexbox, it's probably a really good time to start learning Flexbox. Some people are using it in production already, but if you're lucky enough to say, we only support IE 11 and up, you know, wouldn't that be great? Prefixes. So when you declare a style, you put a little hyphen in front of things, and sometimes there's a WebKit after that, like hyphen WebKit, hyphen MS, hyphen O, hyphen Moz. There's a bunch of these. So the easiest way to manage prefixes is to use some kind of, well, you'd be working with Sass, and then use some kind of module or whatever that's going to plug in those prefixes for you automatically. That's really awesome. Compass used to do that. I don't know. What's the hot thing these days?
There's a thing called Prefixer. It's Prefixer.
Prefixer.
I think it works for like similar text.
Okay. Prefixer spelled like flicker. Prefixer. Auto prefixer is another one. So we can go ahead and put those prefixes in for you automatically. You can also look them up and do it manually. Who wants to do that? That's no fun. That would be an awesome way to go. But I would encourage all of you, as professional developers, it's really time for you to start learning Flexbox so that you'll be ready when we can actually use it effectively. And then keep waiting for CSS4 Grid. Yay! Coming to a browser to you real soon, I promise. Yeah, just as soon as we get rid of the old browsers, because CSS is awesome, right? CSS is totally awesome. We love it. We love CSS. Everybody. I know, I had to put this in, right? Okay, so this is me. If you have any questions about that, and I hope I've given you some hope for your future the next time you are struggling with your CSS layouts. I hope you will think about the CSS4 grid system and know that your jobs will improve probably in 5 years or more. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Yes?
I've heard that Flexbox has some performance issues with use, and I've also heard that those have been resolved, so I was wondering, or in terms of rendering, I guess,
Okay, so Flexbox, does it have performance issues or have those been resolved? I have no idea. I would expect that if there were performance issues, it would be in the browser's best interest to resolve those. So I would say probably soon. And I'm sure that it's the usual suspects that have the issues.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
No, we have no idea what we're talking about. Welcome to the Microsoft Nerd Center. Any other questions? Yes.
So I guess for simplicity, your flexes were all 0, 0.
Yes.
Maybe you didn't have any grow or shrink.
That's right.
And you know, I'm so far behind, I've never heard of Flexboxes before, so thanks for talking about that.
Sure.
What it reminds me of
Yes.
is the box model from Tech,
Yes.
which is only, what, 40 years old?
Yes.
So you're telling me CSS has finally caught up with Donald Duke.
Yes. CSS finally caught up with where we were 40 years ago. Good times. Yeah, some of these,
Does that mean that we might soon have intelligent line breaking algorithms for our HTML?
don't get too excited.
All right.
I have no idea.
I
But,
have heard that we're gonna start doing CSS on punch cards, though.
ooh, fabulous. That'd be great.
But you have to count the line like manually.
That's true.
Right, yes.
Thankfully, that's, a good use for wood type. Bring that back.
We are revealing our ages. Yes, yes. Other questions? Yes.
There are instances where float would still be appropriate for some element.
Would float still be appropriate for some element? You betcha. Just like tables are still appropriate for tabular data. Floats would definitely be appropriate for floating an image. You have a nice article, you want to push the image over to the side and run the text around it. A pull quote. Absolutely. Absolutely. Floats are totally still a thing.
Okay, because I hear people are like laughing about floats still, and I'm like, but
No,
there are still instances.
there are still instances. And we
Suggested that developers like to be snarky.
yes.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked by this assertion.
Yes. Developers do love to be snarky. No, I am so old, I went through the whole table-based layout thing and then the transition to CSS layouts. That's how old I am. And I rode a dinosaur to school both ways. And we went through this period of time where we went we used tables for everything, 15 layers of them at least with our spacer gifts and all the rest of it. And then we said, oh my gosh, tables are like the worst thing ever. You should never use them. And so people would be making charts of data on their page and they would do all these floats and clears and stuff. And it was stupid. That is what a table was made for. So yeah, tables are still they're a thing as long as it's tabular data. Same with floats. There's absolutely a case for them. They were never designed to do page layout.
That's really the key. I mean, if you're talking about dealing with things that are inline and semantically connected, that's what you use floats for.
Right.
Layout, not really.
Right. But at the same time, if you're working for the federal government building a Drupal site and you have to support Internet Explorer 7, you don't have a lot of options. Yeah. So floats are where it's at, right?
That's true. Absolute positioning. Just do that.
Absolute positioning. Yeah, everything. Totally awesome. Oh yeah. When in doubt, stick a bang important in front of it. Always. Yeah, that's great CSS. Other questions? All right, fabulous. Thank you all so much. Thanks for letting me present early.